The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If I said to you the word Cobfefe or Cobfifi, or I don't really know how it's pronounced, would that mean anything to you? Well, if it doesn't, it will by the end of this segment. Donald Trump's bizarre behavior is continuing to raise more mental health questions, and we've done a number of videos sort of calling into question Donald Trump's emotional stability, and we've talked about his reading ability or lack thereof. We've talked about possible early signs of dementia. We've talked about possible personality disorders. And a number of tweets and videos from and of Donald Trump over the last few days are again fueling concerns about sort of all three of these issues. The one making the big headlines is the one with the misspelling of, I guess, maybe the word coverage as Cobfefe, but that's not actually the most disturbing one of these examples. Let's start to dig in. First of all, Donald Trump tweeted not long ago, yesterday, just over 24 hours ago, a sort of incoherent sentence about something relating to Russia and fake news, which I'll put up on the screen for you, saying, quote, Russian officials must be laughing at the U.S. and how a lame excuse for why the Dems lost the election has taken over the fake news. I would love to see one of those syntax trees diagramming this sentence from a linguistic point of view, but we're not going to do that right now. That aside, this is a communication from one of the most powerful people in the world, despite the intentions of many people who are concerned about him and being in that role. This is not exactly an utterance of a mentally coherent individual. Yale University psychiatrist Bandy Lee said last week to Salon.com, quote, I've been thinking from the very beginning that he exhibits many signs of mental impairment. This situation has come to such a critical level. What we're seeing is a creation of his own reality, a reality that will meet Trump's own emotional needs and the need to impose that reality on others. Could what psychiatrist Bandy Lee is pointing out here explain the James Comey firing, which has completely imploded on Trump as a potential way to stem the tide of the Russia-Trump collusion investigations? Could this explain those strange comments about James Comey better hope there are no recordings of our meeting? Could this explain the haphazard leaking of secret and classified information to not only Russians in the Oval Office, but to Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte? Could this explain arriving in Israel and saying, we just got back from the Middle East? Could this explain pushing the president of Montenegro? All of this very, very strange. And adding to these concerns are a few seconds of video from Donald Trump's appearance with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There was a tweet that was sent out from Pace Latin, who is an individual who tweets, I don't even have to give you his credentials, but pointing out, quote, reports say that Trump became confused and didn't know where he was in Israel, and in the middle of a press conference wandered off. We actually have video of this, and watch not only Donald Trump in this video, who, if you're not watching and just listening, does seem to be sort of disoriented, and watch Benjamin Netanyahu's reaction when this is going on. Very short video. Take a look at this. Trump truly looking disoriented and confused and sort of unstable on his feet with regard to where he was. There are folks on the inside of the White House saying Trump is getting worse emotionally, Trump is getting worse mentally, and according to a, quote, source close to him, Trump has sort of receded into his own world since returning from the Middle East. An anonymous source close to Trump said to CNN, quote, he now lives within himself, which is a dangerous place for Donald Trump to be. I see him emotionally withdrawing. video from a Memorial Day ceremony in Arlington, Virginia. You see Donald Trump smiling, laughing, dancing, and headbanging, and making some strange mouth movements that I guess could be at least partially singing along to the national anthem. But again, Trump's demeanor, and I'm going to play this for you, it doesn't really seem coherent with the somber and solemn atmosphere of a Memorial Day event. Take a look at this video.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join the United States Air Force Band in singing our national anthem.
And then, last but not least, Covfefe, which is the funniest, but also sort of the most benign. At 12:06 a.m. Eastern Time last night, early this morning, 10:06 p.m. Mountain Time, President Trump tweeted a very bizarre sentence fragment. Despite the constant negative press, Covfefe, and Twitter exploded. Trump minutes later replaced it with another tweet saying, "Who can figure out the true meaning of Covfefe? Enjoy." I assume that he meant negative press coverage. It is funny. The memes are hilarious. It's all hilarious. But really, this is just a small thing. The real concern is the growing signs of emotional and mental instability, cognitive instability of the President of the United States. And you know what? I'll tell you, it would make much more sense that Trump's bizarre behavior with diplomats and world leaders is explained by cognitive decline or issues than him just being completely in over his head with the presidency, which, let's be honest, we sort of know him to be. On Thursday's bonus show, we talked about Fox News commentator Sean Hannity being forced to take a few days off from his show because advertisers started pulling ads off of his program. And one of the reasons that advertisers have been bailing on Hannity is that he pushed this debunked conspiracy theory about the death of Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich. Seth Rich, if you haven't been following the story, was murdered last summer, and since then there have been a number of conspiracy theories swirling around the internet making various claims about the circumstances of Seth Rich's death. Right-wing propaganda TV channel Fox News has really been the only major corporate news station talking about the conspiracy theories, and Fox News eventually decided to retract their statements and coverage about Seth Rich, and the investigator at Fox News who had been researching the story admitted that there is no evidence to back up the claims. Yesterday, on the David Pakman Show Reddit discussion forum, a video was posted of an RT segment, Russian state media segment, that aired this week, where they hosted a panel of 3 people having a debate about the conspiracy theory surrounding Seth Rich's death. One of the people on the panel was HA Goodman, who was enthusiastically supporting the conspiracy theories. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, HA Goodman was on our show in January of 2016 during the election talking about an article he wrote where he swore up and down that Bernie Sanders would absolutely be the next U.S. president no matter what. I think he continued to say that Bernie would be the nominee if not the president up until the day Hillary Clinton closed the nomination. And I believe even later than that, sort of arguing that any day now Hillary Clinton's going to be indicted or something like that, Bernie will end up being the nominee and ultimately the president. We haven't talked that much about Seth Rich's murder because I don't buy into these conspiracy theories, but there's some new energy behind it, and I want to kind of take that and the Sean Hannity thing and the RT video that I'm going to play for you in a couple of minutes sort of as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what I think is going on here, as well as how certain people and organizations have an interest in sustaining these conspiracy theories. So the backstory. In July of 2016, Seth Rich, a DNC employee, was shot dead near his home in Washington, D.C. The Washington, D.C. police say repeatedly Seth Rich's death was a robbery gone wrong. This took place in Bloomingdale. That's the D.C. neighborhood. It's a neighborhood with not an insubstantial amount of violent crime. A robbery like this would not really be out of the ordinary in this neighborhood. In 2016, within just a quarter-mile radius of where Rich was shot, there were 24 robberies that involved a gun. That's one robbery roughly every other week where a gun was used, right where this occurred, a quarter mile from Seth Rich's house, and this took place right near Seth Rich's house. But since his death, conservatives and some mostly dogmatic Bernie Sanders fans have tried to blame the murder on Hillary Clinton or the DNC or maybe WikiLeaks for knowing, quote, too much about something. Many of them are saying, well, Seth Rich was actually the person responsible for leaking the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. It wasn't Russia, and that's why he was murdered. Many of the people and websites putting out these conspiracy theories are the same people who hyped up those bogus Pizzagate conspiracy theories. Now, I am a Bernie Sanders supporter, or I was in the 2016 election, right? I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. I think we need more politicians like Bernie Sanders. I've been critical of Hillary Clinton on this program. But there are Bernie or busters and Hillary haters enamored by this conspiracy theory because it vilifies the DNC, it vilifies Hillary Clinton, and the leaks that we're talking about included emails showing that DNC officials were disparaging Bernie Sanders and his candidacy and trying to tilt the primary in Hillary Clinton's favor, which we know happened and which we've been critical of. Rich died right after Hillary Clinton got the nomination, so at the time there were clearly a lot of sore and escalated feelings when it took place. Conservatives enjoy this narrative because it makes the Democratic Party look bad. Trump supporters would love for this to be true about Seth Rich's murder because it would also imply or expose that Russia wasn't responsible for the DNC leaks, which is great for the Trumpists. Julian Assange, who operates WikiLeaks, also pushed the conspiracy theory, and we know he's shown an interest in distancing WikiLeaks from Russia. And there was absolutely no evidence that Rich had anything to do with the DNC leaks or that his murder was set up by Hillary Clinton or by the DNC. All of this was based on people saying Hillary's shady and he died right after the leak. So, of course, he must be at the center of the entire thing. And so soon after this murder, the noise about the conspiracy theories sort of died down because there was no evidence until 2 weeks ago. People start talking once again about Seth Rich's murder because a private investigator told the local DC Fox News station that he and someone at the FBI had evidence of connections between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks. Immediately, right-wing outlets jump all over this, Fox News, Breitbart, The Blaze, who immediately put out their own stories about what the private investigator said. But then later that same day, the private investigator says, oops, sorry, I misspoke. I don't actually have evidence of Rich being connected to WikiLeaks, but someone at the FBI told me about it. Not a direct quote, but roughly what this investigator said. The private investigator explained to CNN that he thought Fox News had the evidence and that he was just giving a preview of what Fox News would eventually report. The investigator said, I only got that from the reporter at Fox News. However, Fox News also didn't have evidence. Fox News was reporting on the evidence they believed the investigator was claiming to have. It's a circle with no actual evidence. So now the only evidence of there being a connection between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks is that a private investigator said someone at the FBI told him. That's why Fox News retracted everything. DC police say that the assertions put forward by the investigator are unfounded. The FBI has said it was never part of the investigation. So maybe Seth Rich had something to do with WikiLeaks and the DNC planned his murder. But like all other conspiracy theories, whether it's the moon landing being faked or Illuminati or whatever, we have to go off of what evidence we have and the simplest explanation, Occam's razor. And right now, there really isn't any evidence or anything pointing to it being true. However, check out this segment introduced by Peter Lavelle on RT, who is a known Russian puppet. I mean, look up the history of Peter Lavelle. Check out the segment done on RT, and they invited HA Goodman to participate in this.
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. On July 10, 2016, DNC staffer Seth Rich was murdered in Washington, D.C. Was Rich the source who provided Wikileaks with DNC's internal emails? Some have speculated this was the reason for his murder. If true, what becomes of the mantra, Russia did it?
Yeah. So the guy in the debate arguing in favor of the conspiracy is once again H.A. Goodman, who has a career as a columnist, basically exclusively catering to the Bernie or bust crowd. That's how H.A. Goodman has become popular. Look at his track record in terms of his YouTube subscriptions. I have no personal problem with this guy. I've interviewed him. He's offered to come back on the show, which we have not taken him up on. He spent the entire election vilifying Hillary Clinton and saying she should be prosecuted because of the email server. I'm just asking you to weigh the evidence, inspect the people peddling the narrative and what their motivations might be. The people pushing this conspiracy theory seem to be exclusively people acting either on the behalf of the Russian government, far right-wingers, people on the alt-right, Trump supporters, or people who just hate Hillary Clinton. And again, Seth Rich's family has said, stop. Seth Rich was not involved in this. You are making it worse for us. Seth Rich's family is saying the conspiracy theories are really bad from them. This is different from the Trump-Russia scandal. That is a story and a scandal in a million different ways. Everything with Seth Rich is speculative and hypothetical. Am I wrong? Let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We are audience-supported independent media. We have this thing called membership on our website, davidpakman.com/membership. And today's new member of the day is Sean Beckner. Sean, thank you. We couldn't do it without members like you and everybody else who supports our program. I invite you to join Sean and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. We do have a coupon code, which is IVoted17, which will save you 40% off of your membership. If you want it, you don't have to take it. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 per month at patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow. I know people are anxiously awaiting Hatriot Mail this week. Let me not delay any further and remind you what we are talking about when we're talking about Hatriot Mail.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Exactly. So let's jump right into this week's Hatriot Mail. It's a little longer than some. It's a little wackier than some as well.
David Pakman, the only one humiliating himself is you, low-life liberal loser. How come you're so stupid? We can only guess by just looking at you first. Your nose covers almost all your face, so we're to believe that you're an expert newsman. What is your expertise? Most likely stupidity and ignorance. Get a life and a real job, because you suck big time at what you think you're doing. Do us all a big favor and get off this channel and get a real job like cleaning sewers or garbage pickup, or go to a garbage dump and pick through it. Maybe you can find yourself a better suit or a good used toothbrush. That's a great job for you, asswipe. Post by VL.
Yeah, I account, if you don't include the fact that there's not a single period in this entire Hatriot Mail, I count 6 or 7 spelling and grammar errors, and I don't want to focus on those. I actually want to focus on what is being pointed out there. What does the size of my nose have to do with my credibility? Unless, and you know I don't even really have to say it, unless there is some implicit bias based on the characteristics that this person is assigning to my nose. I think we all know where that's going. And again, this whole thing about getting a real job, I'm almost starting to think that some of our viewers, the Hatriots, sort of resent that this is my real job. And I think for that, we can all be glad. Remember, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive by using the coupon code HATRIOT40, HATRIOT 40 at davidpakman.com/membership. Let's talk about the Paris Climate Agreement. According to two sources with direct knowledge of the decision, Donald Trump has indeed made the decision to pull the United States out of the U.S. climate agreement. Now they need to figure out sort of the logistics of how to withdraw. There's a couple of options. One is to initiate a full formal withdrawal, which could actually take up to 3 years to complete. The other option is for the United States to exit the underlying United Nations Climate Change Treaty, which would be faster but more extreme, according to a report just from an hour ago from Axios. This is huge, and if for no other reason than that this is actually a way that Donald Trump could undo President Obama's legacy, and it is a more direct path. We've talked about lots of the executive actions which have been symbolic. They're not actually representative of changes to policy. They are sort of indicative of changes in terms of the attitude of the White House. This would actually, first of all, pull the U.S. out of a significant climate agreement, but it would also send a major signal to the world and to the other countries that are part of the Paris Climate Agreement that the United States is not committed to being a part of the solution to the climate crisis, and it could lead to other countries bailing as well, not necessarily because other countries don't want to be part of the solution to the climate crisis, but because other countries, particularly smaller countries, could say, rightly so, we're tiny. If the U.S. is not going to participate, why should we do anything that would cause us to adapt or adjust the sort of day-to-day energy consumption and impact our citizens if our impact on world climate change is so tiny because we're a little country, if the U.S. isn't even going to be party to this? There are only two other countries that aren't supporting this deal. They are Nicaragua and Syria. Not exactly the countries that you would imagine the U.S. wants to throw in with and say, hey, this is the group that is doing the right thing on climate. It's Nicaragua and Syria and the United States of America. The U.S. does not have its you-know-what together. That's the message that is sent by Donald Trump pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And it reminds me of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has now been ratified by every country except for the United States of America. What can other countries do in response to this if they want to sort of, I don't know if punish is the right word, but push back against the United States? They can do quite a bit, and I've been very clear that trade wars are usually not good for anybody, but other countries can put tariffs on U.S. goods, for example. And by the way, in this context, it's important to note that while the majority of Americans believe that climate change is real, roughly 79–80%, we still have about half of Americans who do not believe that climate change is caused by humans. So Donald Trump is, on the one hand, building anti-American sentiment by pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but he is also reinforcing the non-scientific beliefs of roughly half of Americans that humans are impacting the climate. And this is why people were concerned about Trump's decision-making ability. Every day we read news about how China and India are making significant investments regarding climate change. And the U.S. reaction is to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, which allies of the U.S. will be happy about this? Is the EU going to say, wow, we're really glad that the United States is no longer going to be part of this agreement? Is Canada going to say, hey, you know what? Our alliance with the U.S. is strengthened because Donald Trump has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement? No. And in the era that making coalitions and allies should be a top priority in foreign policy, Donald Trump is doing so much to create one of the biggest anti-U.S. coalitions ever. And what's most disturbing to me about that is that there are Trumpists who like that. There are Trumpists who love the nationalistic approach of Trump, and they see other countries' frustration with the United States and with Trump as a good thing. The really important question for us to start keeping track of is, when the presidency is over, how long will it take to recover from the ridiculous decisions that Donald Trump is making, and more importantly, the repercussions of those decisions? Donald Trump's son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner, is now not the only Trump associate to get pulled into the Russia scandal in the last week. We already knew that Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, was part of the FBI's investigation into ties between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. We've talked about Michael Cohen acting as a sort of middleman between Ukraine, Russia, and Trump in regards to the plan to lift sanctions on Russia. People involved were caught lying about the timeline of events that went on with that. And recall that Michael Cohen hand-delivered this plan involving the lifting of Russian sanctions to disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and lied about it. And we have now found out that Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's personal lawyer, has now been pulled in to the congressional Trump-Russia investigation. House and Senate Intelligence Committee investigations have asked for the cooperation of Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, in their probes, requesting testimony, requesting certain records that might shed light onto Michael Cohen's connections to Russia. And Cohen has refused. Not exactly the response you'd expect from someone with nothing to hide who is completely innocent. This could actually lead to the subpoenaing of Michael Cohen's documents as well as his testimony in these investigations. The Senate Select Intelligence Committee has already voted unanimously to allow their leadership to subpoena those documents. Remember, and this is where it's all starting to come together, remember that when the Trump-Russia blackmail dossier, as it's sort of known, went public a couple of months ago, the dossier asserted that Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, met with Russian officials in Prague in 2016 and was sort of the primary mediator for Donald Trump in those Trump-Russia communications. On ABC News, Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, gave a very carefully worded response about that, where he said, quote, "I've never actually walked the land in Prague, and last August I was not in Prague." Keep in mind that Michael Cohen is a lawyer. I wonder if, in the mind of a lawyer, landing at an airport in Prague, but I don't know, never clearing customs, would legally not be walking the land in Prague because he didn't actually enter the country. You're not legally in the country until you've cleared customs. Did he maybe land at an airport outside of Prague, used for private air travel, and never actually went to Prague itself for whatever meetings he allegedly had? We just don't know, but that is a very oddly worded denial from Michael Cohen. Anyway, last week Cohen visited the White House to consult with Trump about hiring a team of personal lawyers to represent him in the Trump-Russia stuff. We know that Donald Trump did that. I reported to you about that last week. This is the guy, Michael Cohen, who has helped Trump deal with everything from frivolous libel lawsuits to rape allegations. And if there is anyone who's going to be calculated and slippery in all of this, it's Trump's lawyer, who probably is among those with the most intimate knowledge of Trump's legal life and how to best deal with these situations related to the investigations. He's sort of the, if you watch Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, Michael Cohen is sort of like the Saul Goodman of Trump's organization. And if you've ever seen interviews with Michael Cohen, you know how slick he can be. Big picture trend, all of the investigations are growing in scope, not shrinking in scope, not petering out. And there's a discussion, probably at this point, a couple discussions about this on our Reddit discussion forum, which I encourage you to participate in. davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Elizabeth Currid-Halkett, who's the James Irvine Chair in Urban and Regional Planning and Professor of Public Policy at the University of Southern California. She most recently is the author of The Sum of Small Things, A Theory of the Aspirational Class, which I recently read with great interest. Elizabeth, let's start a little bit with consumption and how in society over time, how consumption and wealth or status of other kinds is displayed. If we go back a few hundred years, generally speaking, how was wealth noticed in others?
So if we go back to the person who was my inspiration for this book, Thorstein Veblen, he wrote a book in 1899 called The Theory of the Leisure Class. And in it, he looked particularly at the leisure class, although he did make comments on all of society and how different socioeconomic groups revealed status. And his argument was that material goods that did not have additional utility were the ways in which people revealed wealth. So his very famous example is that of the silver spoon, which, you know, at the time, it wouldn't have been better than an aluminum one in terms of function. It wouldn't have even looked that much different, but it was slightly prettier. And what it really revealed was that you could afford a silver spoon. And so initially, status was revealed through and displayed through stuff. And that has actually been the case for a long time, and it still is. It's not like that way of showing status has been completely eradicated, but things have evolved because, you know, with first the Industrial Revolution and then the manufacturing economy of the 20th century, a lot of us have a lot of stuff. So it's less valuable for social positioning.
What about something like at the time, and we'll get to how this has changed, but just to sort of set the scene, I want to dig into education a little bit. I mean, at the time, was education something that had that even had utility in the same way that it does today in the context of the job market, or how was education seen at this time?
So that's a really great question. I'm really fascinated with the role of education in society and how it's evolved. So again, referring to Veblen, Veblen saw university educations as conspicuous leisure. So you didn't go to, Oxford and study Greek if you had to get a job. Okay, it was incredibly luxurious to go to an elite institution just to learn. And empirically, you can see this because a lot of jobs, even in the 20th century, when we had the emergence of a middle class where people were making really good money, through jobs. It wasn't just simply like an upper class or an aristocracy, but you actually had this emergence of people who had, real money and made it. Even they didn't require a college education. Now, the precise stats I don't have at the top of my head, but it was under 10% for both men and women in the mid 20th century. Under 10% of them had a college degree. And now we're dealing with something like 33% of the population. So this gets back to your original question, which is how has education evolved as a signal in terms of signaling? So I think initially education was absolutely a part of conspicuous consumption, conspicuous leisure. You didn't need it. You did it if you were able to enroll in university if you had the time, the money, and you didn't need to get a job. Today it's different, right? So we live in a ostensibly, and I emphasize ostensibly, meritocratic society, and college is really important, and elite universities are really the ticket to the club. So whilst, of course, a parent's really proud when their kid gets into MIT or Harvard or one of these top elite universities, it's also a necessity for upward mobility to go to university. And so what I've seen in the data is I've actually moved education into inconspicuous consumption. People pay for it because they know it's their way to make it in the world now. And so it's not so much about status, even though that's a nice byproduct, but it is actually about how social mobility is reproduced, and it's expensive now. and people really have to work to send their kids to college. And so that's become an enormous chunk of where certainly the upper middle classes are devoting resources.
So in part 2 of the interview, we're going to get into some of the broader economic impacts on class and inequality of some of what you describe in the earlier part of the book, The Sum of Small Things. But I want to talk with you a little bit about some of the new inconspicuous consumption. And what's interesting to me about some of these activities, and this includes from the book, again, examples that you give, free-range organic chicken versus, the normal chicken you get at the grocery store, or heirloom tomatoes versus the other kinds of tomatoes, or organic cotton shirt where where the cotton was farmed and what the children of the farmers are studying in school or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
You only really understand those as signifiers of status if you are already sort of part of the in-group to at least some degree, right? I mean, somebody who is not in the world where you even understand about organic cotton or heirloom tomatoes, they're not really going to be impressed when they find out that their neighbor has heirloom tomatoes or organic cotton shirts, right?
Yep. Well, my parents would not be impressed with any of those things.
Right.
So, my parents are Irish immigrants. They live in rural Pennsylvania, and those would not be markers of status for them. And, they're from a different generation, but I also think that they geographically speak to the fact that some of these kind of bubbles of aspirational class are geographically specific, and also they really are, it is sort of insider's baseball. They matter to the people who are following it, but they are more or less irrelevant to other people.
And what does that tell us about, I guess, we still have conspicuous consumption in 2017, and it's more along the lines of the car you drive, or if you have a particular type of watch or whatever the case may be. What are the sort of most notable distinguishing factors in how modern day conspicuous versus inconspicuous consumption is seen by society at large?
So again, another really terrific question. So one of the things that's important is it's not like conspicuous consumption and conventional luxury goods have totally disappeared. I mean, people are still spending a lot of money on luxury cars. Designer handbags are still very popular. So these, and of course watches are too. So it's not that they have disappeared. And the identity in which people form around these things is also more fluid. So, there are all sorts of contradictions, right? Like you care about organic food and you drive a diesel car, but you have a, $2,000 handbag. Okay. I mean, that person exists in the world, right? So I think that you have this kind of blending. What makes, I think, the aspirational class unusual, and I think a new class of people, is there is a new way in which they form their social group, which is through these subtle, tacit information that they're caring about organic food and free range this and caring about the environment. And in a way, you might say that they're not a million miles from what David Brooks called Bobos. I don't know if you remember the book Bobos in Paradise. Yeah. But the thing that I think is really different about this group is there's a real lack of self-consciousness. I mean, this is a group of people who feels they're doing right. That they are making good decisions for their children, that they're making good decisions for the environment. They are not uncomfortable with their social position. They in fact think that, unlike perhaps previous elites, that they're actually doing better in the world. They're not just buying luxury handbags. They do prefer their NPR tote. They're not all really wealthy. What they are all rich in is cultural capital. And I think that that's the really distinguishing characteristic for them.
We're going to pick it up there in part 2 of our interview with Elizabeth Currid-Halkett. We've been speaking about her book, The Sum of Small Things, A Theory of the Aspirational Class.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I told you about the multi-billion-dollar arms deal that the Trump administration signed with Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest sources of terrorism around the world over the last who knows how many years, a totally oppressive and violent regime, and yet, still, we continue to do big arms deals with Saudi Arabia. So Trump gets back from his trip in Saudi Arabia. A press conference is arranged to talk about the trip. An acting assistant secretary for Near East Affairs, Stuart Jones, was tasked with answering questions from journalists about the trip. The last question was asked by Dave Clark. Dave Clark is a reporter with the Agence France Presse. He created one of the most awkward, cringeworthy moments of press conferences under the Trump administration, and that says a lot because there have been no shortage of those. I mean, Sean Spicer is press secretary after all. Let me first read to you the question that was asked by Dave Clark, and I hope you're prepared for this because this is going to get really bad. So the question from Dave Clark was, quote, "While you were over there, the secretary criticized the conduct of the Iranian elections and Iran's record on democracy. He did so standing next to Saudi officials. How do you characterize Saudi Arabia's commitment to democracy? And does the administration believe that democracy is a buffer or barrier against extremism?" Brilliant question, right? How can you criticize Iran's democratic process while you're standing next to and Trump dancing with people from Saudi Arabia, diplomats from Saudi Arabia? It doesn't really make sense. This froze Stuart Jones for nearly 20 seconds. It's going to feel like 5 minutes because it's so cringeworthy. It's only 20 seconds. And then he gives just an insane non-answer. This is one, I mean, this was like a robot malfunction. It reminds me of when Marco Rubio repeated the same thing 4 times during one of those Republican primary debates. It seemed like Stuart Jones malfunctioned here. Take a look and listen at this.
Well, you were over there. The secretary criticized the conduct of the Iranian elections and Iran's record on democracy. He did so standing next to Saudi officials. How do you characterize Saudi Arabia's commitment to democracy? And does the administration believe that democracy is a buffer or barrier or against extremism?
Go on.
I think what we'd say is that at this meeting, we were able to make significant progress with Saudi and GCC partners in both making a strong statement against extremism and also putting in place certain measures through this GCC mechanism where we can combat extremism. Clearly, one source of extremism, one terrorism threat is coming from Iran. And that's coming from a part of the Iranian apparatus that is not at all responsive to its electorate.
Yeah. Get him out of the room. So that was it. That was the end of the press conference. I almost feel sort of bad for him because he's being asked to defend the indefensible. It's not Stuart Jones's fault that we have this indefensible, depraved friendship and alliance with Saudi Arabia. This has been indefensible by the U.S. for decades, right? This friendship with the Saudi government, an immoral friendship, a depraved friendship. Saudi Arabia is a hereditary Sunni monarchy and the global source of radical Islamic terrorism, and yet it is an ally of the United States. Iran is we can't call it a democratic republic because it's not, but it's ostensibly semi-democratic, which just held at least what we could consider elections, where there was a reform candidate that was seeking greater ties with the West, and it cleaned the clock of the conservative hardliner, but that is an enemy of the United States. I'm not saying that Iran shouldn't be an enemy of the United States. What I'm saying is the double standard and the hypocrisy with regard to the Saudi Arabian relationship is utterly indefensible. The question is actually unanswerable in a way that makes sense to humans with brains capable of logic, and clearly Stuart Jones wasn't able to get around that. Maybe we should be commending Jones for even being able to put together that non-answer, but just a total implosion. And again, these questions are not answerable because the policy does not make sense, and that became completely evident when Stuart Jones froze for 20 seconds before being able to muster irrational, haphazard talking points. I almost feel bad for the guy, but not really. Here's a real red flag. President Donald Trump has been urging world leaders to call him on his cell phone. If you know anything about anything, you realize that that raises major security and secrecy concerns. Who has Trump's number? We know that Canada's Justin Trudeau has Trump's number and has used it. We know that Mexico's president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has Trump's phone. We know that France's new president, Emmanuel Macron, and possibly others have Donald Trump's personal cell phone number. What's the problem with this? Well, it's not a secure communication. You are exposed to eavesdropping. You are exposed to surveillance. There is a transparency issue with this, where there are no transcripts or records of those calls, and it could be circumventing government transparency. By the way, the government transparency that Donald Trump promised would be the hallmark of his administration. Vlad, how are you? Oh, no, I'm not busy. I'm just here at Mar-a-Lago playing a round of golf with Rodrigo, my new buddy, who's doing a heck of a job on the war on drugs. Check out the cool phone that Sergei Kislyak handed me in the Oval Office. Great for international calls. It even has a Moscow area code, so calls to Russia are local. No roaming charges. Pretty cool, right? How can Donald Trump with a straight face criticize Hillary Clinton for a private email server? How can you criticize Hillary Clinton for her handling of sensitive information when Trump is not only talking to world leaders on his personal cell phone, but also just spilling secrets to Russian diplomats and suspected spy recruiters in the Oval Office, jeopardizing the safety of allied countries' operatives? Spilling the location of nuclear submarines on the phone with the Filipino president. It's inconceivable that this is what we're dealing with. And even government-issued cell phones are generally considered to be at risk of eavesdropping by foreign governments. This is not, as far as we know, a government-issued cell phone. This is Donald Trump's personal cell phone. I haven't started House of Cards Season 5 yet, which came out yesterday. I'm looking forward to it. But there's no way that Season 5 of House of Cards could even approximate the craziness of the real world right now, right? I mean, it's just inconceivable that this is what we're dealing with in 2017 with the President of the United States. I've got a voicemail for you here. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The voicemail relates to the story we did, or we answered an audience question last week about loaning money to friends and family, and the Eggman called in and connected producer Pat's response to that audience question to producer Pat talking about his conservative family members. Take a listen to this.
I thought it was really funny how Pat said his immediate family members were conservative Trump supporters, and he could debate stuff with them. And then he also said 20 minutes later he would not only loan them money, he would just give them money with no expectations of having it returned. I wonder if his conservative family members would loan him the money the same way he would loan it to them. Pat?
Is that a fair question, Pat? I mean, is there any reason to think that the incongruous politics of you and some family members might impact their willingness to help you financially if you were finding yourself in such a situation?
I don't think the Eggman here realizes that I have a huge family, and while there are plenty of conservatives in my family, there are plenty of liberals too. I mean, I think they would lend me money if I was in need, even though they're right-wingers. I think you got to put family ahead of politics on this one.
Would they expect the money back, though?
Well, I just think that they would give me the same offer that I gave to them, which is, here's some money. If you're able to pay me back, pay me back. If you can't, so it goes. You know, I think they would reciprocate and give the same offer as I would to them.
Fair enough. Well, is this an unfair question from the Eggman?
I don't know. We never see the Eggman so feisty. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. He seemed agitated. There's no doubt about that. I certainly agree with that. On the bonus show today, I'm going to talk to you about high school teenagers that invented a straw that could detect common date rape drugs in drinks. I'm also going to talk to you about someone who wants their genitals removed to become a genderless alien. It's an odd story, but a real story. And also I'm going to tell you about an upcoming new sponsor on the David Pakman Show. Very, very cool stuff going on. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. How do you get instant access to the members-only daily bonus show? You might know the answer to that by now. I've mentioned this before. You go to davidpakman.com/membership. If you want a discount off of the normal membership rates, you can use the coupon code IVoted17. And of course, we are taking pledges in any amount, even as little as $1 per month, at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I'll talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.